After I did the first tree, the next progression was to do the tree of American music, and again, trying to find out how to coordinate the music, and I basically thought I would just go on the premise of using the country and cutting the country in half and dividing into east and west, and because that's where most of the music initially was coming from, and then later the Midwest and the South developed their own types of music. And so but again, this tree was a little information was a little bit more available. Books were being written. Music was starting to explode. Independent records were making their debut, and other genres were getting bigger and bigger. Heavy metal was developing into its own world, but Southern rock and so forth. But again, the logistics of dividing the country into two sometimes makes it a difficult design problem, because you run out of groups that originate in one section of the country, and then they sort of dry up, and then you find yourself kind of in a quandary what to do when one part of the tree stops growing. But luckily it came into worked out fairly well. Again, at the bottom of the tree you have the major contributors: the Chuck Berrys, the Elvis Presleys, the Little Richards, and so forth. And then you have, at the very bottom, you have groups that started to make what we know as rock music. You know, the Sam Cookes, the James Browns, the so forths. From the urban areas, as the time goes on, you find the West Coast now has started to develop. They're developing their own sound, which influences a lot of people. And the 60s, again, growing up in the 60s, a lot of this stuff really was an enjoyable period of time to live through, because the bands were so good, and the music has lasted over the years and has held up real well. So you got your initial music coming up here, the psychedelic, the California sound. You have over here you have a little bit more of the R&B, the soul, the singer-songwriter, the short-lived jazz, rock, which turned into what we call heavy metal. You have a little bit more of the toward the end of the 70s, you have the development of the Midwest is a hot spot. Develop of the Southern music, Southern rock, and then as you look over the tree, the peripherals are bands at this time developing independent bands just starting out, and so forth. And again, the great things about the early music was that the logos that the bands developed and became signatures of their type of music and so forth. It was a lot of fun. As you get into the music over the next decades, logos, except for heavy metal bands, ceased to be a focal point, and larger groups, though, they have maintained a lot of their importance and remain very strong. But it's a never-ending situation with music. There's always some new type of music, and again, independent music has started to give us unlimited amounts of bands, good, bad, or ugly, and so it's a real challenge to keep fighting to stay at least even with what's going on. Okay.
Okay.